Hi everyone! I'm here today to do my February reading wrap-up. February felt like a very chaotic month. It felt really long, even though it's the shortest month of the year. So let's just dive right in. So the first book that I read this month was Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason, and I posted about this on my Instagram, but I absolutely adored this book. So Sorrow and Bliss follows a young female narrator protagonist who is essentially struggling with a lot of mental health issues that are not really known. She just sort of has a lot of mood swings, and it's sort of something that kind of hit her when she was, I think, around 18, and it just felt like her brain was just like drowning, and she's kind of felt that way ever since. And it's really just about her trying to make her way through the world. It's about her falling in love, her dealing with her family, coming to terms with her mental illness, and it was just written so well. I was worried it was going to take like a cheesy bent, and it really didn't. And I just really thought that the author played so well with all of these characters, and I just loved it. It was heartwarming. It was like laugh out loud funny, but also heartbreaking. Like it was really good. And I thought it was just a good look at like mental illness and taking responsibility for yourself, as well as what that means in order to heal. So yeah, I loved Sorrow and Bliss. Highly recommend. It was like a sweet, lovely, lovely read. Maybe one of my favorite reads so far this year, if I can say that yet. I don't know. Okay, and then I read Gentrifier by Anne Elizabeth Moore, and I picked up this book because I picked up this book because I had read this book of short essays by Anne Elizabeth Moore back in the day, called Body Horror, Capitalism, Fear, Misogyny, Jokes. And I highly recommend this. It's kind of her writing about women's bodies in politics and the economy. It talks about her struggling with having an autoimmune disease and chronic pain. Yeah, it's just really well done and really good. So anyways, I loved body horror, and when I saw that she was writing a book about being a homeowner for the first time, and it was entitled Gentrifier, I was really intrigued. And this is essentially Anne Elizabeth Moore's memoir, not really memoir, but just, it's nonfiction, but it's her talking about what happened when she was given a free house in Detroit as part of an arts nonprofit project. So there was a nonprofit in Detroit that was giving out free homes to artists to sort of attempt to revitalize the arts culture in the city. And Anne Elizabeth Moore took them up on the offer after much deliberation, because she herself was experiencing lots of housing insecurity, as many artists, writers do. So it's sort of about that, her coming head to head with what it means to be a homeowner, a white homeowner in a city surrounded by people of color and absolute economic devastation. And she talked about moving into a majority Bengali Muslim neighborhood and what it was like to build community in that neighborhood in an appropriate sense that didn't feel like she was just gentrifying the neighborhood. And then it was also her dealing with this nonprofit at the same time that gave her a free house, which at the end of it ended up basically not being free. And it's kind of her ruminations on, you know, how we all deserve a safe space to live, how gentrification is complicated and nuanced, and that it's private housing and mortgage lending And even the way that like cities deal with it can be like they prey upon those who are poor, they make money from foreclosures, that sort of thing. So she kind of dug into all of that, which I really appreciated. And I think that we need more books with this sort of nuanced look at gentrification, because as we all know, the housing crisis is becoming more and more complicated and affecting almost everybody. So yeah, I think a great companion read for this would be Evicted by Matthew Desmond. Is that who wrote that? Yeah, maybe not, I don't know. Yeah, because that really looks into the rental side of things, people who rent, and she dug a little bit more into what it means to be a homeowner side of things. So I really appreciate those two books on kind of looking at the modern housing crisis. Yeah, so I really liked Gentrifier. It was good. Yeah, and if you also want to pick up this guy, was also a big fan of these essay collections. Okay, then I read, what did I read? Okay, next I read How Much of These Hills is Gold by C. Pam Zhang, and this is Zhang's debut novel. And I was drawn to this book a while ago because it's a historical fiction about the California gold rush. And I love reading books about California, and I do have a penchant for historical fiction, but I'm picky about it. So I picked this one up from the library because I was going home to California earlier in February, and I wanted to read something set in California while I was there. So this book follows two siblings after they have been orphaned when their father dies. And it's a beautiful look at the gold rush in a very not romantic sense at all. It's very gritty, it's very dark, and it's very realistic about two young Chinese American children traveling the West on their own after their father dies. So it's very dark, but it was very well done. And I really love how this book explored different parts of the gold rush in the sense that how it affected culture. And one of the aspects of that was that there was a lot of practicing queerness and people that were experimenting with different gender identities due to kind of the makeup that the gold rush created, and that it was mostly men. I was looking this up after reading this, but there was a historical fact that some men would dress up as women when they would have dances because there were just no women around, and they needed people to be women in order to hold these dances. And then a lot of young children would pretend to be boys so they could go into the mines because only boys were allowed into the mines. So it's really interesting how the author uses that history in this and creates a really beautiful look at transness and queerness. So I loved that aspect of the book, and a lot of it is about trying to understand where they belong. People keep asking where they come from, but they were born in the United States, but their parents were born in China, and their parents would talk about this distant land and how they wanted to go back, but it was something they never knew. So just a gorgeous book. The setting is a good reason why to read this, the history factor, and then also just the relationship between the two siblings. So I very much love this book. It was such a joy to read. I'm really excited to see if anything else by this author comes out soon. I also know that this was nominated for the Booker in 2020. So give How Much of These Hills is Gold a read. I highly recommend it. Okay, then I read California history theme going on here. Island of the Blue Dolphins by Scott Odell. So you might have saw my video where I went home and we went to the Channel Islands, and I was reignited with my 10-year-old love of Island of the Blue Dolphins. And I reread this book and oh my God, I loved it. So nostalgic. It reminded me of sort of the books that I loved when I was a kid, which was mostly young people kind of on their own having to make it in the wilderness. And this follows a young Chumash woman who is stranded on one of the Channel Islands after the rest of her tribe is taken by missionaries to go to the mainland. And she has to survive there for, I believe, 20 years until she is found again. And it's just, a lot of it is obviously fictionalized, but this Karana, the Chumash woman, really was a historical figure who was stranded on the Channel Islands. And stranded is maybe I shouldn't say stranded because she could have also been there by choice. There's a lot we don't know. And how she lived off the land, fought off wild dogs, hunted octopus, ended up training one of the dogs to be her pet. Yeah, it's just really, really fascinating. And I loved just reading about the landscape and also seeing how so much of what she's experiencing in the natural world in this book is so different. She talks about otters and abalone, and pretty much both those things do not exist around the Channel Islands anymore due to them being extinct, almost extinct like abalone, and then with otters having left that area because of overhunting. So yeah, just loved this book. It was such a joy to read. And yeah, I think it's so special to read things from childhood again and the things they ignite and yeah, help you remember. So this was Island of the Blue Dolphins. Okay, and then this book, Hidden Valley Road, I listened to this on audio this month, and I listened to it probably over the whole month because I listen to books on audio when I drive to work. And that's kind of the only time I listen to audiobooks, so it takes me a while to get through a long one. And this is a story, which, don't be mistaken, when I first saw this book, I thought it was about the ranch dressing empire, Hidden Valley Ranch. I thought it was like doing some expose on them as a family and if they're corrupt or something, I don't know. Anyway, no, Hidden Valley Road is about a family who grew up in Colorado Springs, and they're 12 children, Irish Catholic. I come from Irish Catholic background, so there was a lot of cultural things I got here, but their family they have 12 kids, and 7 out of the 12 are diagnosed with schizophrenia, and that is sort of what the book talks about. It kind of goes through the timeline of how each child kind of started to feel the symptoms, and then at the same time gives great like historical background and narrative of kind of the research of schizophrenia and how that was going side by side while these children were getting diagnosed. Because in the 60s and 70s, there was very little known about schizophrenia as an illness. So it follows that up until present date. And it was a super interesting audiobook to read. It was really well narrated, really well written. I'm a little bit picky sometimes about these kind of nonfiction books, but this was very narrative and very engrossing. And I highly recommend Hidden Valley Road. I learned a lot as well. And yeah, just really grew to love these siblings in the stand. Like there were parts where I was listening and I was like, like, oh my God, and like almost crying. So it was a gorgeous, wonderful, wonderful narrative nonfiction book. So highly recommend that. Okay. And then I read As We Saw Vladimir by Julia May Jonas. So I had a little reading vlog where I talked about this book, and I kind of put my foot in my mouth because I said something. Let's see if I'll insert the clip here. Big fan of this. Hopefully the next 30 pages won't change it for me, but this book. But then something happened in the last 50 pages that made me change my mind about this book. overall, I really liked it. And for those of you who don't know, Vladimir is a story about a woman who works in academia. So does her husband. They're both English professors. Her husband has been asked to go on leave because of a string of accusations of him having sexual relationships with students. Not recently, but in the recent past. And it's sort of her, the wife, dealing with all this, trying to justify these affairs because she knew about them. And meanwhile, while all this is happening, a new couple come to the small college town and are professors, and Vladimir is one of them, and he's about 40, so 18 years-ish younger than her, and she becomes obsessed with Vladimir, and that's sort of what the rest of the book is about. It's her obsession with Vladimir, her trying to deal with her husband's shame, trying to see how much responsibility she had in it, deflecting a lot, all this stuff, culminating in this very interesting ending that I thought was, when I first read it, I was like kind of just getting through it and was like, okay, I guess that's how it's happening. I see what an author's doing with that. And then after sitting with it for a few days, the ending felt a little cheap. There was a plot device that was used to try to maybe atone for some things that were happening, and it just felt sort of, I don't know, quick, and like they were just trying to wrap it up, and I didn't necessarily like the ending. But up to it, it was really fun to read. It was definitely very rompy. There were like parts of it where I was like, oh, where is this going? Like, there was like fun elements. You can definitely tell that the author is a playwright for sure. It was just the ending felt a little bit like hurried, rushed, and cheap. So besides that, I still liked Vladimir. And I would still recommend it to people because it was just like a fun read. Okay. All right, so then I read Happening by Annie Ernaux, and so many of you have just been singing her praises in my comments, so I am 100% going to be reading more of her. I just got The Years checked out from the library, so I will hopefully be reading that soon. But this follows Annie Ernaux's. It's kind of her, she mostly writes autobiographies, which I've learned. But this follows her when she was, got pregnant in the 60s and was seeking an abortion in France when it was illegal. And it's just this beautiful, short, you can see it's pretty short, little book about that experience. And she writes it 40 years later. So she has some like snippets where she's also looking back and bringing in her current perspective. So I absolutely loved this book and recommend people read it, and I'm really excited to read more by Annie Ernaux because she just seems like one of those gorgeous, thinky women. And I like reading authors who really commit to the memoir autobiography genre. So one of the reasons I really like Mary Carr, she does the same thing where she mostly writes in memoir, and I love it. So excited to read more. Okay. And then I read Pure Color by Sheila Heti, which I also talked about on that same vlog where I talked about Vladimir. And this was sort of the opposite, where I said, I don't know if anything in the last 50 pages is gonna make me like this book. And then the last 50 pages kind of made me like this book. So both of those books, kind of the opposite thing happened. And I think it was a mixture of two things. Something about the last 50 pages sort of tied it all together for me a little bit. Not completely, I still think this book is on something, for sure. But after sitting with it for a while too, I realized how much of it I had underlined, how much of it I found deep and meaningful and beautiful. And yeah, a lot of it was like all over the place, up in the stars, who knows what a lot of this means, but the parts that hit really hit. I liked so many parts of it. I underlined so many sections, and I really think that she's getting at something that's hard to get at, which I think is kind of the woes of modernity and existence and information age and all this stuff. And she's really trying to cut through all that and just get to kind of what does it mean to exist and be human. So as absurd as it is, so is everything around us. So I say read Pure Color, give it a shot, revel in the strangeness. Yeah, at the end of the day, I did like it. So that's me putting my foot in my mouth, part 2. Isn't it cool how books change after we read them? It is pretty cool. Okay, then last book. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think I read 9 books this month. Some of them were small though, so that's kind of on the high end of books for me. I just read this over the weekend, Things I Don't Want to Know by Deborah Levy. And I have read The Cost of Living by Deborah Levy, and so this is my second Levy, but oh my gosh, so good. If you don't know, Things I Don't Want to Know is the beginning of Deborah Levy's living autobiography series. So she wrote 3. We have Things I Don't Want to Know, Cost of Living, and Real Estate. And Real Estate just came out last year, and so I have that one and I'm excited to read it. But Things I Don't Want to Know is supposed to be on writing. So it's her kind of exploration of looking at how she writes and is a writer, and the way that she weaves in her past trauma from her childhood was so brilliantly done. And it's sort of about her and her adulthood being overcome with this sadness, and she's not sure why. She talks about how she keeps crying on escalators. So she takes a trip to Italy, a place that she's gone before, to write, to just try and write again and see if she can figure out why she keeps crying on escalators. And within that, she kind of meets another guest where she's staying, and she goes into this story of her childhood in South Africa. And essentially her father was arrested. I don't know for how long, maybe a couple of years. He was in jail in South Africa for resisting apartheid. And it talks about her experience then, and then how they, after he got out of the jail, they pretty quickly left and emigrated to the UK. And it's a short book, but it's so well done. The 2 sections where she's recounting her past, both in South Africa and in England, are some of the best forms of storytelling I've heard. I was so engrossed in them, and it talks a lot about how when she was younger she had a hard time speaking up, and that she had to learn to find her own voice to write. But it's hard because to find her voice she has to connect with things she doesn't want to know, things she doesn't want to talk about, doesn't want to remember, but she like kind of has to in order to like move past that. So it was just so gorgeous. Man, I love Deborah Levy. Or is it Deborah Levy? Sorry, y'all. I don't know. Yeah, just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. We'll be reading Real Estate soon, maybe next month, and we'll let you all know. And I also want to read some of her fiction. I have Hot Milk. That's here in my apartment on my physical TBR. There's a lot of books in my apartment on my physical TBR. We don't need to talk about that. Yeah, so that's everything I read this month. I tried to be fast and snippy about it, but it's hard to do when I have a lot to say. And then right now, I'm reading Beasts of a Little Land by Joo-hae Kim, who is a Korean-American author, and I believe she lives in Portland, Oregon, so not far from where I live. And I wanted something long, sweeping, historical, and family-oriented, kind of like Pachinko. I was craving reading Pachinko again, and so Beasts of a Little Land is giving me those vibes. It's following early 20th century Korea under Japanese occupation, and so far has a lovely cast of characters that are kind of all resisting different forms of power And yeah, I'm excited to see where this goes. Also, I know I was looking up, the author is really into animal rights, and there's a lot in here about tigers. And there was a lot in this one about tigers too. So very cool. Excited to read this. Yeah. And on that note, I've been wanting to read more things that are sweeping, that have plot, that aren't maybe just so singular in one person's mind. I'm feeling a little over it, maybe not over it, but just wanting a bit more. Yeah, so that's what's going on. I decided that maybe after I share my books every month, I can share some things that I'm looking forward to. So to start, I'm looking forward to tulips blooming, flower vendors being back at the farmer's market, starting my garden, so all things garden related. And I have been excited by seeing all the crocuses popping up in my neighborhood. Spring is coming in like 20 days, and the time changes, I believe, next week. So those are all the things I'm looking forward to. Getting outside more sun, more flowers. Spring's my favorite season, so 100% looking forward to that. Yeah, feel free to tell me what you've been reading, if you have any thoughts on the books I've read, and what you're looking forward to in the comments. Yeah. Thank you all for being here. I've loved being on BookTube. I'm having so much fun with this. So, yes, love you all and happy reading.